Hello and welcome to Make 100 Games. This is the second video in my series on building a Mario Kart style kart racer. In our last video, we set up our project and created a rough version of our track using Unity's terrain editor. It's pretty fun to drive in the track, but it still doesn't really look anything like a proper cartoony kart racing track. So what I want to do in this video is work on making this look like a proper Mario Kart-esque track. We will do so by editing the terrain shader and by creating cartoony textures for the grass and for the dirt using Krita. I will not be typing up all of the shader code manually, so no worries. Instead, I will paste in the code and explain a few things here and there. I will also provide a link to the shader code in the description. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so this is what our game looks like right now. So as you can see, we have a basic terrain here, but it doesn't really look like much. So in order to modify what the terrain actually looks like, we have to modify the terrain shader. The easiest way I found to do that is to actually just go ahead and create our own material. So we're gonna go ahead and create a new folder here that will house our materials. So call it materials. And we're just gonna create a new material that will be the material that we will use for the terrain. So create a material, call it terrain tune. Up here in the shader, drop down, we can go here and we can go to universal render pipeline because I'm using URP here. Go to terrain and select lit. Now this is the shader that the terrain is actually also using right now in the material that's assigned to it. But what we want to do is we want to now actually modify the shader of our own material. So to do that, we're going to just hit edit here. We're just going to choose Visual Studio Code, hit open, ignore this one here. Ignore it again, close everything else. And in here, we're gonna hit open folder so that we can actually get to where these shaders are stored. And what we're gonna do is we're going to select our terrainlit.shader file and our terrainlit.passes.hlsl. So these two files, terrainlit.shader and terrainlit.passes.hlsl. We're gonna go back to Unity and let's actually also create a new folder here that will house our shaders. Just keep things organized. Open it up, go back here and drag these two files into Unity. Drag these over there, go back to Unity, and now we have these two shader files in our project. And now we can go ahead and modify these without modifying the stock shaders that are shipped with Unity. What we're going to do first, though, is I'm going to rename this from terrain lit to terrain tune. And terrain lit passes, I will rename to terrain tune passes. We're going to open the first one here in Visual Studio Code. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to rename the shader. That way we can find it with the name that we give it in the shader dropdown for the material. So we're just going to rename this to tune. So this is the path under which we'll be able to find it later. So universal render pipeline, terrain, and tune. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that this references our terrain tune passes.hlsl file. So let me just copy the name here. And we're going to have to find what the name of the old HLSL file was. So the easiest way to do that, I think it was passes.hlsl, terrainlit passes.hlsl. So let's just go ahead and replace all these references with our new file, terrain tune passes HLSL. We're going to have to do this for all 5 occurrences here. Okay, let's make sure that everything's wired up properly here. And to do so, we're going to go back to Unity. We're going to now actually use this shader in our material, and we're going to assign the material to our terrain. And it should look exactly the same as it does now because we haven't actually changed anything yet. But this will verify that our shader is wired up correctly. So let's go back to the materials. Select our terrain tune material and choose our shader. So we should be able to find it under universal render pipeline, terrain tune. Save and give it a second here, and it looks good. Let's also give it a quick run. Looking good, so there are no shader errors. If there were shader errors, we would probably see them here in the console, and the shader or the terrain would just be pink or purple. I forget exactly which color. But yeah, one of those colors to indicate that there's a shader issue. Okay, so now that we have our shader all set up, the first thing we are going to do is disable the blending between the grass and dirt layers. If we look at our reference image from Mario Kart again, we notice that there is no soft blending between the two layers. It's a hard cut. If we really want to nail the cartoony look, we're going to have to ditch the blending. So to do this, we will modify what's called a splat map. A splat map is a texture that tells the terrain shader where and how strongly to draw each terrain layer. In our case, grass and dirt. The splat map essentially stores the blend weights. So to kind of help understand this a little more, how the splat map is used by the terrain shader to color in the different layers, what we can actually do is we can go to our terrain tune passes file. So in here, this is where all the magic happens essentially. Like this is basically just kind of like the entry point that points Unity to everything else. And this is where the actual shader magic happens. So if we go ahead and open this, we see a couple of functions here. And the first one that I want to just show you real quick is this splat map mix. This is where this blending of the different layers actually happens. And I'm not an expert in this myself, but basically this is where all this essentially happens. And just to kind of help you visualize how this splat map is used by the terrain shader, what we can do is we can replace the sampling or the use of the splat map to sample the different textures of the different layers by a calculation that essentially just draws hard-coded colors for the different layers. This is a pretty neat little debugging trick if you're not sure which channel of the splat map is used for which layer. So if you replace this here with something like this, and we save it and we return to Unity, we will not see anything yet, actually, because I realized I didn't actually fully wire up our shader yet, because we set up the material to use the right shader, but we actually forgot to change the terrain's material to our custom material. So let's go ahead and do this. You can actually see here in the preview that we see red here. So let's go to the shader or to the terrain, select the terrain settings, and here we see the material. Let's go ahead and hit this here and select our terrain tune shader. And once we do so, you see here a pretty wild tie-dye kind of looking terrain. And what is happening here is exactly what we specified here in this splat map mix function. We're essentially saying for channel R, use red; for channel green, or the second channel, use green; for the third, use blue; for the alpha, use yellow. And it looks like it's blending in, or it's showing red and green, our first two channels. So we know that red is grass and green is dirt, or rather grass is the R channel and dirt is the G channel. Yes, I just quickly wanted to show this to you just to help you understand how these splat maps work. What I will do now is I will paste in the code that we need in order to cartoonify our terrain, and will not dive into exactly what it does all too much. I will explain a little bit along the way, but I am not an expert in this myself. I did obtain this from my fellow friend ChatGPT, but I'll provide the code to this shader in a link in the description. All right, so let's without further ado, let's get this in there. So I'm just going to go ahead and undo the code from before so that it samples the texture again. And we're going to scroll all the way up here first. Above the attributes, we're going to define a few properties here, namely for the Fresnel effect. And then we're going to scroll down to the splat map mix function to disable the blending. And just above it, actually here, just above it, we're going to paste in a helper here. This will calculate the channels of the splat map in such a way that the blending is disabled so that we have a hard cut between the grass and the dirt layer. And right here, we're going to call this helper. This will essentially disable the blending. And next, we're going to scroll down to the fragment shader because we want to affect how the coloring of the terrain is handled. So let's go down here to the vertex and fragment shader. So not the vertex shader because we don't care about the positioning of the vertices of the terrain, but rather just the coloring of it. So let's find the fragment shader. So here's splat map fragment. And right here, after we define the albedo, we're going to add the code that is needed to add the Fresnel effect and also to create this little transition between the grass and dirt layers that adds a bit of a shade to kind of give this impression that there's a overhang between, or that the grass slightly overhangs the dirt. So here's the Fresnel effect that we apply. And a little farther down is where we do the kind of shade effect between the grass and the dirt. So in order for this to actually work, we also have to essentially expose these properties in the shader file itself. So if we go back to the shader and go all the way up to the top here, the first couple of properties we're going to add in here are the properties to control the fresnel color, power, and strength. And now if we go back to Unity and wait for it to refresh, we should see the effects of our shader work. So this kind of glowy effect that you see when the camera angle is kind of moved around, this is the Fresnel effect. Pretty much an essential for any kind of cartoony Nintendo style game. And personally, I absolutely love this effect. And the second thing you see here is we have a hard cut between the grass and the dirt. And then we have this kind of shaded edge, or this fading, darkening edge between the two, to kind of give the impression that the grass is kind of like farther, kind of like overhanging over the dirt. So that's pretty much all of the shader work we're going to do. Next, let's create some textures for the grass and the dirt. So to do that, we're going to open up Krita. And let's start with a grass texture. And let's just go ahead and create a texture of about 1024 by 1024. We'll go ahead and create a fill layer, get a bit of noise, make it loop. I think this is pretty good already here. And in the layer style, let's try to change the blend mode to normal and give it a nice bright green color. And add another fill layer. Reduce the frequency of this one to something like this. Give it another layer style here. This time we'll leave this one on multiply, give it a bit of a darker green, and change its opacity. Let's bring this up a little bit. So it definitely pays off to experiment a bit with this here until you get the color you want. Okay, I think this is looking pretty okay. Maybe darken a little more here. Export this. Okay, let's create the dirt texture. So I'm going to go ahead and create another fill layer. Another noise here. Lower the frequency to something like this here. Give it a layer style. Leave it at multiply. Increase it here a bit. Give it a nice bright beige kind of color here. And add another fill layer. So just a color one here. Make it a bit darker brown. And reduce the opacity to something like this to kind of look, kind of like a dusty dirt texture. And export this as well. Okay, and last but not least, let's create one more texture here. And we're just going to add a fill layer again. Give it a nice bit of noise. Leave it as is here. We're going to flatten this. And we're going to create a normal map from this. So height to normal map. Something like this looks pretty good. Save this as dirt normal. Okay, and now it's time to import these textures into our project and add them to the terrain. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder just to keep myself organized here and call it textures. And add all the textures into this. Make sure to select your normal map and change its type here to normal map and hit apply. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our terrain. We're going to go to our layers here. Let's select the dirt layer, hit edit, and we're going to delete these textures here. And let's take our textures, our dirt texture, and we will also add our normal map. And what we're going to do is we're going to now play around a bit with the tiling of this dirt texture. This is definitely tiled way too much. So let's just go ahead and give it something like 15 and 15, something quite large. My tip is always don't worry too much how it looks like when you're zoomed out like this. Like this, of course, everything looks like it's repeating a lot. And it, of course, will repeat, but it's more important that it doesn't look too repetitive when you're in here in the actual game view. So it's still a bit too much for me, to be honest. So I'm just going to increase the tile size a bit more. This is starting to look better. Let's leave it at that for now. The normal map is a bit too intense, so we can maybe just reduce the scale a bit here, just to give it a bit of depth here. We don't want to have it to be totally flat like this, but we also don't want it to look like this. Maybe something like that. Just very subtle kind of look here that we just see a bit of texture. We can also just check here with the camera angle. I think it looks quite nice. Let's go ahead and add our grass texture. So we're going to select our grass layer, hit edit, and delete the albedo or diffuse and the normal map, and add our custom texture. We're not going to have a normal map for this one here. So let's just leave it like this. And let's also change the tiling here to something like 15 and 15. Yeah, it's starting to look pretty good. I think the dirt texture is maybe a bit too bright, so I might have another look at that one. Still a bit too bright, I think. I'm going to darken it a little more. Let's try this one. Yeah, looking pretty okay. I think I'm pretty happy with this for now. So let's give this a quick test run here to see what this looks like when in motion. So I'm just going to increase the tiling a little bit. The dirt is repeating a bit too much. I think the grass is pretty good. Let's give the dirt tile a bit more. It could also be that it's just maybe a bit too strong here, this shading. So maybe I'll just change it in the texture a little bit more to be a bit less intense. Let's give this a go. So as you can see, there's a lot of tinkering, a lot of trying out. There's never a single perfect way to do it. And of course, it's up to you how far you want to go with this trial and error. Now it's looking a bit too gray. Yeah, I don't like that it's this gray. I like the previous one more, actually. So I'm going to go back and make it a bit more colorful again. It's not saturated enough. Let's give this one a go. Yeah, I think as you can see, you can quickly get yourself in a situation where you end up going in circles a bit. So I'm just going to increase the saturation a little bit more again, and then I will leave it be for now. So I'm gonna go ahead and open this here. I'm going to increase this here, make sure we're fully saturated here. Or not fully, but more, a little more like this. Export one more time. And this is much more like it. Yep, I think this is all right. Okay, so one final test run here. Yeah, I think this is pretty good. Once you have the actual dirt texture that you're going to use in your game, yeah, you also start to see how much you need to adjust your terrain's layer borders essentially to kind of get to the amount of track that you want to have, right? Like this is quite wide. So I might go back here and actually just adjust these values here a little bit. And I forget which way I have to go with these. Okay, so I have to go lower, but not too low. Yeah, maybe something like this. And just do a quick check here. So now we see here that this is quite narrow there, but this is pretty good. I do like this. So we're just going to go over here and deepen or make this a little deeper here. So let me just go here and raise or lower terrain, and we're just going to increase the size of the brush ever so slightly here, but reduce maybe the opacity and do a repaint. And we can already see it's getting wider, maybe even a little more, ever so slightly here, maybe on the side here. A little more still. Just make sure to smoothen this out a little bit so that it doesn't get too bumpy there. It's still a bit too narrow again. Okay, that was too much smoothing. Just going to increase the size of the brush and push everything down a little bit here. There we go. Let's just give this a go. Overall, pretty solid. Pretty happy with this. Yeah. All right. So that's it. We have a pretty nice looking cartoony track to kind of work with. All right. Our level is looking a lot more kart racery. Let's recap what we did here. We first created our own material for the train. We then edited the shaders of the material and turned off the soft blending. We also added a nice shaded border between the grass and the dirt to give it the illusion that there is a slight overhang. We also added a nice fresnel effect because, well, it looks awesome, and you can't have a cartoony racer without fresnel. We then created our own grass and dirt textures and applied them. We also added a normal map to the dirt layer to give it a bit more depth. Overall, I'd say we made pretty good progress. In the next video, we will go the extra mile in making our track pop by adding some nice details to the track itself. Details like some track lines that follow the path of the road and some nice tread marks. We will also add the checkered line that will mark the beginning and end of the lap. So if you want to give the track that extra bit of polish, be sure to subscribe and check back next week. And thanks for watching.